TK-421 stood at attention, the gleaming white armor of the Imperial Stormtrooper fitting him like a second skin. For years he had served the Empire, moving from one battlefront to another, following orders without question. But today was different. Today, TK-421 felt a strange unease deep within him as he stood on the barren surface of Jakku, watching the horizon for any signs of the rebel scum. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was almost deafening. TK-421's thoughts wandered to his training days on Coruscant, to the camaraderie of his fellow troopers, and to the sense of purpose he had once felt. But the Empire was changing, and so was he. A sudden burst of static crackled in his helmet, snapping him back to reality. "TK-421, report," came the voice of his commanding officer. "All clear, sir," he replied, scanning the horizon with his blaster at the ready. But it wasn't clear. Far in the distance, a small dust cloud rose from the desert floor, growing larger by the second. TK-421's heart raced as he recognized the telltale signs of an approaching rebel speeder. His training kicked in, and he raised his blaster, ready to engage. "Incoming enemy contact, Sector 3, he shouted into his comm. The other stormtroopers in his squad immediately took their positions, forming a defensive line. The speeder was closing in fast, its engines roaring as it cut through the desert. TK-421's finger hovered over the trigger, waiting for the perfect moment to fire. Then, as if time slowed, he saw them. The rebels were no more than silhouettes against the setting sun, but he could make out their determination, their resolve. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were fighting for something more, something he had never understood until now. The first shot rang out, and the battle began. Blaster fire lit up the darkening sky, red and green bolts zipping past each other as the two sides clashed. TK-421 took aim and fired, his shots precise and deadly. But even as he fought, doubts gnawed at the edges of his mind. Why was he here? What was he really fighting for? The Empire had promised peace and order, but all he had seen was destruction and fear. The rebels were willing to die for their cause, while he was just following orders. Orders that no longer made sense to him. A blast rocked the ground nearby, throwing him off balance. He stumbled but quickly regained his footing. The speeder had been hit, and the rebels were dismounting, taking cover behind the wreckage. TK-421's squad pressed the attack, but the rebels fought back fiercely, refusing to surrender. As the firefight intensified, TK-421 found himself face to face with a rebel soldier. The two locked eyes for a brief moment, and in that instant, TK-421 saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. The rebel didn't hesitate. With a swift move, they disarmed TK-421 and knocked him to the ground. Lying in the dirt, TK-421 waited for the final blow, but it never came. Instead, the rebel offered a hand, pulling him up. "You don't have to do this," the rebel said, their voice filled with conviction. "You can fight for something real." TK-421 looked around. His squad was either dead or retreating, the battle all but lost. The Empire was crumbling, and the promise of a better future seemed so distant now. He looked at the rebel, then at the battlefield, and finally at the setting sun. For the first time, he made a choice. He dropped his blaster and removed his helmet, letting the cool evening air hit his face. "I'm done fighting for them," he said, his voice steady. The rebel nodded, a small smile forming on their lips. "Then fight with us." As the last light of day faded into night, TK-421 walked away from the wreckage, away from the Empire, and toward a new beginning. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path.